I am unashamed. What about you?
Took me 20 minutes to get out of my bed and walk to the bathroom. It took me 20 minutes.
That was this morning?
To go from the bed to the floor. It took me 20 minutes. Both yesterday and
Day before.
Today, though.
So are you getting any better?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I don't know if he'd know if he was, you know.
I'm sitting right here. I'm getting better. What are you talking about?
No, you did good, Phil. Nobody's ever going to say you're not tough. I can tell you that.
Pull the muscle.
Did you ever talk to Zach about, can you talk about the Patriot thing?
Zach, I think we can talk about the Patriot.
Well, I've already seen it. I mean, it's out, so.
Yeah,
I'll
talk
watch
about it.
Okay, yeah, we can talk.
I think we're recording right now, right?
Well.
All right, we'll just
go.
This
is it. This is a true cold open right here. When we went through probably the first 3 minutes of the podcast, or minute and a half of the podcast, and we didn't know. I knew we were recording. You guys didn't know, so we probably should tell the audience of what had they stepped in on here with the conversation about 20 minutes getting out of bed. You were nervous that Phil was driving.
I mean, Phil, one day before duck season is down. This is the story I heard. Is trying to move the boat because it's a low water year, and I think he had a flashback and thought he was 26 instead of 76. So he pulls a muscle or tears a muscle. He did something bad in his back.
This was on the day before duck season.
The day before.
Okay.
But Phil showed up. And it's about as down as I've ever seen you on just in life. And because Phil wouldn't most people would have just said, you know what?
Yeah, I need to sleep.
I've torn a muscle in my back because duck hunting is rough.
It's rough if you're 100% healthy.
Even if you're, we were trying to cater and get him to the blind. We didn't know for sure how deep the water was. Well, it wasn't quite deep enough to get the boat in under the boat run in the blind. So that means you got to get out, haul all the stuff, put out the decoys. So about 9 o'clock on opening day, Phil said, "Hey, Jase, go get the boat." And so I don't think Phil's ever volunteered to say, "Let's go."
Especially on opening day.
It was really cold also. It's a wet cold here. Because if you say brutal. The temperature, people are like, "Oh, it was 34 degrees."
I was just sitting there.
Yeah, Phil was violently shaking.
Hurting
and cold. Well, Phil didn't even have a coat on.
Yeah.
So
Phil lays down. So he lays down.
It's the worst day of duck season I've ever had.
Well, on opening day he didn't. Today, now we took yesterday off,
which was Sunday.
Yeah, and then today they all tried to talk Phil out of not going, and but there he was. But he had some doctors intervene, and to my surprise, they gave him something that was
one of the greatest,
powerful.
One of the greatest conversion stories ever was when I converted a heart surgeon, and I missed being there because I was down in my back, but I didn't tell him. I didn't call him or nothing. I just had it, but he called me.
Yeah. You missed your class, right? Yeah, you missed your class Sunday, and he said, "What's wrong?"
Which says something about the consistency of a person, because the minute he found out you weren't there because you were down, he got on the phone because he knew something was wrong with you.
He said, "Why didn't y'all call me about that?" Miss Kay said, "Well, I know you got a lot of people, you know."
I think I said pride, stubbornness.
He said, "You don't get it." He said, I'm a doctor. He said, "I've had what you've had."
Yeah.
A couple of times I had to pull a muscle.
Yeah.
He said, "That's the worst."
Yeah.
He said, "I've been through it took me 20 minutes to get out of bed.
Just to put your feet on the floor.
To get my feet on the floor and be standing upright, it took me 20 minutes.
Damn.
But Phil, if you take one of those muscle relaxers, it might have taken you 2, but you might have been moving in your mind in slow motion.
No, but that's before I had any medicine.
Oh, okay.
That's before the doctor called. When he found out I wasn't in class, he said, "I wonder where he went." So somebody said, "Well, I think he's down in his back." So So the doc calls me up and says, "Look, here's what you get. Get somebody up there right now, and get these three medicines." And he said, "Because I've had what you've had before, and it's pulled a muscle in my back." He said, "Yeah, that's as rough as it gets."
Yeah.
So I did. I took what he said, and I mean, overnight, I was sleeping this morning. See, I was
This morning, Phil,
I was sleeping on the blindfold. Boom, 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 boom.
it was a strange sight because Phil,
Don't get any of them.
Phil got in the blind and
I have to tell our audience, don't be offended because we're laughing. It's the way we are. So, I mean, he's better now. So.
I'll
What's
tell you
wrong with
the
us?
real story what happened because Phil probably won't even remember this in a couple of hours. But I looked out and he made a pillow with his coat.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't one of our more comfortable blinds. You know, is that blind up the lane?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's not comfortable. And I looked and I thought, well, Phil's taking a nap. But it was like 5 minutes after legal, you know.
Well, you got to remember the little redneck woman. That's Miss Kay's. What would you call it when you take care of an older
She's
person?
her assistant.
Huh?
She's her assistant.
Call her an
Her
assistant.
assistant.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, she come up there. She got wind of it, so she sets up a bottle on the table, and I looked at it, and it said horse ornament. You know, you put it on horses to
Oh, like to loosen them up? Like
loosen
like
them
a
up.
liniment?
horse
liniment.
She had horse
liniment.
liniment. She had horse liniment. She
liniment.
said, "You take this stuff right here." She was telling me about it, and I said, "A horse liniment?" I said, "You think that'll work?" She said, "Oh, it'll work, you know."
Boy.
Well, she said, "Let me see, where's it?" She pulled up the back of my shirt. I had my woman witnessing all this. She pulled up my shirt, and she started putting this horse ornament on my back. Well, I had put that. Somebody had put this freeze all. You don't bottle it.
Oh, yeah, biofreeze.
All right. Somebody had just put biofreeze a couple of hours and rubbed it in. Well, when the horse ornament hit that,
Liniment, Phil.
she said, "Good night. You've got pus coming out of your back." And I said, if it's pus back there, call an ambulance. I said, because I don't think it's pus. I said, it ain't that. She said, "Oh, there's something there." And I said, "Well, it's that biofreeze after you put the horse liniment on." I mean, you're talking about a redneck trying to get a redneck up on his feet. Good night.
Oh.
I got this redneck girl that helped Miss Kay stay alive, putting horse ornament.
Liniment.
Everybody had the idea about they had diagnosed me. I said, "Look, if it is pus, call an ambulance right now." I said,
I hadn't even heard that story.
Well,
I didn't either.
I thought it was a pulled muscle, but I got it diagnosed by the redneck girl. I said, "No, honey, you're a little off on that." I said, "That's a biofreeze mixed with the horse liniment. That's what you're seeing."
Oh, my goodness.
In other words, look right here. When I reach right here, it's just like a knife in my back right now.
Yep.
Yeah.
When I do this right here,
Don't do
it's
that.
like a
Don't
knife.
do that. Yeah.
I mean,
So Phil took a nap
you're only
today,
2 days
and
removed.
so we shot a couple bunches, you know. And I looked down, but Phil ain't moved, and I was like, "Is he breathing?" And Godwin said, "Oh, he's snoring." And I was like, "Wow!" But then Phil woke up probably 8:15, 8:30, and you were like, "Hey, all right, how many we got?"
He was back.
We probably should say that this, for those of y'all listening that are confused by this interaction, this is for us. This is what compassion looks like.
Yeah.
You know, this
Yeah,
is
when somebody we know they're okay, then
Yeah.
we laugh about it. I mean, that's,
Well, we weren't really laughing about it in the blind, but I guess now that we're revisiting it, because I kept thinking, boy, he sure is a tough old bird. It was cold this morning. I was like,
Do you feel better, Phil? Do you feel like you're getting better?
Oh, from the last night, I took a real doctor's advice on what to take and when to take it, and it helped a whole lot. I got up this morning. It took me about a minute and a half to kind of get over there where I can get off where my feet could hit, and you had to see what it is right now. I can't just stand up right now. If I stand up, it's to hurt my back. However, if you take both hands and you put on your legs and you press down on your legs, I got my pressure on my legs right here. See, I can get up.
All right, you're
Yeah,
making
don't
me
overdo it.
nervous,
Don't
Phil.
overdo
Let's
it,
just-
though. Yep.
See, I can get up now. And when I sit back down, I push them down on my legs. And it's not like a knife in your back. I mean, I barely can stand up, but I got to be careful doing that.
Yeah, we don't want you to re-injure.
So I'm 76, but I'm still kicking. I'll be back.
You'll be back.
So it's been an interesting opening of duck season for
Well,
sure.
we actually had a really good duck hunt today.
That's what you were saying.
It was.
Well, y'all got a
good.
big freeze coming in, right?
Yeah, it was a little weak on opening day, but today was, we weren't, but just a few shy of the limit. So it was, and we got some good eating ducks. We had some wood ducks and teal, and so everybody was excited about that.
We're going to make our cornbread dressing with those this morning because they were woodies and they were very fat, got a good aching.
Well, we
crop.
also shot 3 green wing teal. I don't know if you.
3 with green wings.
I love those green wings. So
Yeah, you take it
Well,
easy on that dressing.
I left right. I guess I left right before because I was down there last week filming, which we had to get Greg Sampanero, who's the cardiologist.
Yeah, that's the one that
That's
Dad was
him.
talking about. Yeah.
In fact,
Yeah.
before
So I
I hold
actually
that,
caught-
y'all go ahead and carry your conversation. Let me go tell old Gavin, make sure.
Where's he going?
he's going to tell Godwin to pick the green wing teal. So.
What's
There is a
happening over
little. I mean, he has a doctor's
There's kind of an
excuse.
echo
Everyone.
effect.
There's a doctor's excuse to everyone. But this has been my last 4 hours.
But I feel like again I have to express to the audience. So this is the way Dad is though. Like if he's not going to stop. I mean, he's like
No, look, since Phil left,
because we tried to get him to like stay home, rest. Dad, you got the rest of the duck season.
I actually could have said this in his presence because I'm 99.9% sure he will not have any recollection of the proceedings here. But
I think this is people. This is why people love podcasting, and this is why I love it. I mean, it is like truly
real.
reality.
It's real
You're,
life.
you're like you're
This is not
witnessing
staged.
something. It's not staged.
The way that works,
Here he comes.
you go out there and I shuck me a crisp $50 bill. And I gave it to old Godwin. So Godwin, get them 3 teal too. Here's your money. He said, you don't have to do that, but his hand was already moving toward mine. So
He wasn't saying no.
I just wanted to motivate him to pick the teal because I ain't got time to pick the teal. We got a podcast.
well,
in
no,
the
I hope
back.
this doesn't catch on in churches. They're like, give him a bunch of put some muscle relaxers in
And the
the Lord's
$50
Supper.
bills are flowing.
Yeah, and it'll relax that muscle off that hand so it can reach down into the wallet. And
I was happy.
I'd have done it for 20, Phil. But anyway,
Yeah, I had one of them. I did a wedding on Saturday, and so I'd already told him as one of our neighbors down here, and I'd married his brothers, and it was Mom's hairdresser's son, and she takes great care of Mom. So I'd already told the boy, I said, "Now look, I don't do this for money anymore." And at one time, somebody slipped me a Hondo to do a wedding. I was proud of it,
Yeah.
But I was like, "Don't give me any money. I just don't want it to be weird." We get there. Well, his pa-in-law, his future pa-in-law, comes up and he holds out $100 bill. I said, "No, I'm good." And he just puts it in my pocket.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
point out you got to take it.
well, right. But what they didn't know was once the wedding was over, I slipped it in the pocket of the young man. I said, "Here, this is for your honeymoon. This is on pa-in-law." So I gave it back to him. So that's the way it worked. We just worked that right. So what I love about the Christmas season is that we celebrate the birth of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. We also celebrate that Mary, his mother, chose life. She was unwed, and we know she was betrothed to Joseph. And, she had some difficult decisions to make, but she made the best ones for all of us. And that's what we're asking for this holiday season. We want life to matter, and we want women to make choices for life. And one of the groups that's helping us do that is a group called 40 Days for Life. They've been there through the whole battle. We've been battling this for 50 years. Finally got Roe overturned, but the battle still goes on. They have 1 million volunteers in 1,000 cities. They hold peaceful vigils outside abortion facilities And they have a large presence in blue states, California being the biggest. So we support what they do, and we'd like for you to do the same thing. Check out their locations, their podcasts, and they have a free magazine as well that you can get at 40daysforlife.com. They're going to keep you updated on what's going on in the pro-life movement and what's happening in post-Roe America. So if you'd like to volunteer, get their information. We'd love for you to check them out. We're proud partners with these guys. That's 40daysforlife.com. Check them out. Tell us about you. I want to hear about your, since we did the last podcast, you did the, which I've watched it now, so I saw it. I thought it was really funny. But you went to the, you presented an award at the Patriot Award.
I didn't actually present an award. What they do, they have the Patriot Awards. I was not familiar with it because I don't watch TV much. But, we have our show on their network. So we were invited down. And they said we would be part of the presentation. So what they do is they do Patriot Awards, but they also introduce their new shows and different things. And so we, when we went, they did a run through, and it was Murray and Jep and me. Missy came. I think it was just us four.
Was Jessica there?
Jessica was supposed to come, but Gus had the flu.
Okay.
And so she didn't go. And we had our showrunner for our show went with us. So we did the run through, but I thought, well, this is kind of weird because we were introducing a documentary just about animals that they have coming out, but I wasn't familiar with it.
Yeah.
So when that time, you and Missy was on your right, Jason and
Jep,
Murray.
yeah,
they were on your left.
yeah,
And they had y'all in the background.
right.
About 5 minutes before y'all came on, they had the camera.
Well, they did that because the host, which was Pete, Hegseth, they had him on a camo, like tux, I guess, camo suit. And so I think somebody probably in the truck, as they say, said, hey, get in front of those duck guys with the camo. And so they did that. But I forgot even the reason of that. But, look, they're honoring first responders and police officers.
Oh, it's a great, it's a very good.
And people who are, so.
Si and I went a couple years ago.
But anyway, I read the little teleprompter there in the run through, and I thought, this show is new to me.
Yeah.
And so I just thought, I feel like I need to tell why we're here. And so somebody in charge there, when I said, look, I'm not real sure what that teleprompter, whoever wrote that, I'm not real sure what that's talking about. And she said, well, you just do whatever you want to do. I said, okay. Then I thought, if this is a disaster, I'm gonna say, hey, there was a blonde-haired woman that came by here and told me. So I basically just got up there, and
if it had gone south, she just said, I don't know who that guy is.
I don't know who that guy is.
I told Jep and Murray, I said, follow my lead. And I said, Murray, we'll have you announce whatever the show is. And I said, Jep, you can tell a little bit. I'll throw to you.
Yeah.
So what happened was I went out there because I thought, here we are in Fort Lauderdale. I guess it was Hollywood, Florida, which is almost near Miami.
Oh, yeah, it's down there.
So I give my...
And the people there are enthusiastic about it.
There's about 7,000 fans. And then the where you saw where all the tables were all their, their hosts.
Yeah.
Everybody you ever seen.
Personalities. Yeah, they were all there.
They were all there. And so I just said, look, I don't remember exactly what I said, but I said, we're in search for treasure, and we found it here in this room. And I said, the reason we're enamored and award human beings like this is because they show godlike qualities, faith, hope, and unconditional love. Yep. I said, but I want to tell you, we get that from the creator of the universe and Almighty God. So when I said that, they all cheered, which I thought was a good sign.
Yep, I thought I did too.
And then you'll like this, Zach. I said, I am unashamed that I believe there's a God and He is alive or real or something. I kind of went by the Holy Spirit. I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was something in that vein. And the reason I did that was my first little point. So then I threw it to the creation. I said, we treasure hunt. We found treasure here in the heart. Oh, and I did say that. I said, I quoted that is it first or second Samuel, where it says that man looks at the outward appearance of people, but God looks at the heart.
1 Samuel 16, yeah.
I said that, quoted that. And so then my second little point was we also spend a lot of time in God's creation. So I had this deal about the Creator.
So you're leading up to the show.
But here's the deal. I knew the first line of the teleprompter because it was introduced. It said we spend a lot of time in Mother Nature or whatever it said. But I changed that into God's creation. Well, here was where I messed up. Because I quoted the first line of the teleprompter, but since I changed it to God's creation, they didn't realize I had started.
So the prompter
It wasn't moving. So when I said the first line in the God's creation,
they're waiting for you to get back to the script.
I looked at Jep and said, "Tell us about the show, Jep." I threw him under the bus.
That's officially a bus thrown.
So Jep, they knew that Jep was going to talk second. So then they started moving it. So once they started moving it, I interrupted Jep because I knew he had nothing to say because it's not his time yet. So I said, "You remember, it's a documentary about animals." And so then they had him queued up, and Jep said, "Nature from all over the world." He was reading a couple of sentences because I told him, I said, "Don't be scared, but when you start reading, I'm going to do something."
Yeah,
so
he tigers dragging down prey and things just before they were ripped to pieces.
Well, that was after, though, Phil. They showed that after. So when Jep said something about animals all across the globe. And I said, "Hold the teleprompter, Jep." And Jep looked at me like, I said, "No, I know what everybody's thinking." Because this is kind of the problem I had, because I thought people are probably thinking, why do you have a bunch of duck hunters introducing
a nature
show?
That's what you actually said. You said that.
Yeah, that's what I said. That's what I said.
As you realize, before you finish the story, you have taken the Unashamed format and you parked it right in the middle of this scripted award show. Exactly. That's what you did.
So then
we don't do teleprompters.
I said, "I know what you're thinking." And I did. I think I mentioned that. I said, "Look, I'm struggling with this teleprompter anyway." I said, "Because we have an unscripted show." I did that because that my showrunner was there, so I thought she'd find that humorous. But so then I said, "But I just want everybody to know something. I'm making this official here." And I said, "We love animals." I think I said, "My family, we love animals." Well, the whole place cheered when I said
Pretty good roar.
It was a pretty good roar. And I waited just a second, and I said, "They're delicious." It was a joke, sort of.
Did they roar it louder?
Didn't they really laugh? And
really
so
loud.
I thought, then I went back to Jep. I said, "Back to you, Jep." And Jep said, "It's a show about animals, and it's awesome." And Murray said, whatever the name of it was, I think the year on planet Earth, a year on planet Earth, and then just the lights went out. Then they played
for the show.
They played the clip, but we didn't get to see the clip.
The one
But
I wanted.
you remember that Phil's every single episode of Duck Dynasty, when Phil would end with a prayer, he would pray for thanking God for another day on planet Earth. So that there was a tie in there.
But I thought I may never be invited back, especially once I went off script. So I was going to let everybody know that we believe that God is real.
Yep.
And
we do love nature.
We call it what it is. I think I was subtly saying the created thing should point you to a creator.
They've got it about as close as they get as Mother Nature.
Well, yeah. And I was like, I'm not reading that. I don't find that offensive. I would rather say God's creation.
Yep.
And so, of course, then I said to Jep and Murray, I said, "Let's get out of here in case that They didn't like that. Tell the girls we'll meet them at the plane. The plane.
Because the one you wonder about is whoever produced that show. I wonder what they
Well,
thought
I'm
about
sure the teleprompter person was probably helped up off the floor when I just went rogue. But I thought, but now look, having said all that, I only went 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And we were, I mean,
Well,
it was
at
short,
least
sweet, to
there's-
the point, and we did our job.
At least there's a slot for the Lord Jesus and creation somewhere in America, because during this recent election, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, I never heard the word Jesus mentioned at any time through the entire
Probably not.
election for who's going to run the House and the Senate
Right.
and all that. I would have thought somebody would at least shared the gospel with, Jesus died for us now, was buried and raised from the dead. If that's not true, nobody's getting out of here alive. Nobody.
No.
If it is true, there's a resurrection and life, there's immortality.
Well, let's take another break. One of our longest sponsors is a group called Keeps. And I really like what they're trying to do because they're trying to help guys that experience hair loss, especially at an early they're trying to help guys that experience hair loss, especially at an early age, to be able to hang on to your hair. We know as we get older, we're going to lose some of that hair, but some people have male pattern baldness early. And so you see those pictures and you're thinking, man, I either just peel it all off or wear a cap all the time. And so they're going to give you another option, and that's to keep your hair. Keeps has a clinically proven, FDA-approved hair loss treatment. It's available online. So whether you're trying to prevent hair loss or stimulate hair growth or just take better care of your health, Keeps has a medical provider that's going to be there to make sure that you get the right prescription for you. Didn't say prescription. Let me say that again. Keeps has a medical provider that's going to help you make sure you get the right products for you. So no waiting rooms, no pharmacy visits, straight to your door, half the cost of a traditional pharmacy. And they also have 24/7. You can also contact them 24/7 if you have any questions. So if you're ready to take action, you're ready to join thousands of guys who have saved their hair with Keeps, go to keeps.com/door for 50% off your first order. That's KEEPS.com/door, keeps.com/door, and save some money and save your hair. That was you, Dad. You just swerved into my lesson yesterday. So I was talking about the second coming because we're doing a series called The Inverted Gospel where we start at the end and wind up at the beginning because Christmas Day is on Sunday this year.
Is it?
Yeah. So it's kind of a cool concept.
Been looking ahead.
Yeah.
Do you know of any other story that deals with that particular issue?
But my point was, if a story is compelling, you can come into it at any point of the story, and if it's interesting, you'll want to hear more. People make good movies.
Well, tell us. Did you preach out of Mark? Where we been?
No, but I was thinking because we're in Mark 12, about to talk a little bit about heaven.
Well, what was your sermon? Where did you come out of?
I didn't have a specific verse. Here's the way I put it, and this is kind of I've never said this before in a sermon because I never really thought about it, to be honest. But I got to thinking about the idea of the second coming, and you think about God being outside of time and space, right? And then He created. There's no beginning for Him or end, so He just always is.
It's interesting that He's outside of time and space, but He is the time marker for the whole world to this day.
So my point, I began with this statement. I said, so from God's perspective, and then I said, now, we say on the podcast, I could be wrong, because when you say the words from God's perspective, I looked in the mirror this morning, I'm not God. So I'm theorizing here that from God's perspective, the second coming has already happened. Well, He's outside of time and space.
Well, exactly.
So what I'm saying is, if there's no beginning and no end for God, but there was a beginning and end for us, we're just waiting in our time and space for Him to come and usher in this new reckoning.
And it's
exactly.
I've said a lot of things, but it's a great hope.
Yeah.
No, I've said that before, and people we're like, what?
Yeah,
But
it-
I was
it
like,
kinda is a
God
mind
does
bender.
not wait. There's no waiting rooms in heaven.
No.
Just let that sink in. There's no clocks there either.
Nope.
Nope.
And I made the
It's
point.
pretty
there's
incredible
No
when you
allergies or
consider-
diets either. Go ahead.
Well, you
Zach.
consider that like the time itself was created. I mean, that is a
Well, here's what helped me.
mind blowing.
That
That's
is
right.
that
That's
is
a-
correct.
Here's what helped me get this. And I forgot who gave this illustration, but it was a good one. Somebody drew a line on a board, just a straight line. It's from board to board, as far as you could go.
Yep.
And he's like, imagine that line never ending. You know, if you want to make it a circle, make it a circle. But just it keeps on going and it never stops. There's no beginning, there's no end. And then he's like, we were inserted on the line.
Yep.
So
That's right.
that makes sense when you said what you said. He's not it was just inserted on the line.
It's on, and there's a lot in the Bible about it. So I went to Psalm 90, which is where I started, and I use your line, Dad, because I said Moses wrote this 1,700 years before Jesus, along with the Torah, Genesis through Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
Now, so this guy wrote this down 3,700 years ago.
Yeah.
And I said, if Dad were here today, he'd say, what department in salt water gave him this information?
Yeah.
He said, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. So that's in time, right? Because I made the point that because God is outside time and space, he also operates inside time and space. He created the whole thing.
All right.
But then he says,
Well, that's why I said we're inserted on the line, but the line is God.
that's right.
Because God is life.
'cause he's-
That's a key
It's a key point.
designation.
Because people get very confused, and I talked later about it in the sermon about predestination. So before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, so now he's talking about before we were even made,
Yep.
from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. So now he's back to God before he ever created us. I mean, he's painting quite the picture almost 4,000 years ago. You talk about a man with some insight.
What kind of man? How far did you think the guy who wrote that right there? How far had he been on planet Earth as far as just if you wanted to travel? What's the greatest distance he probably traveled?
Oh, he was his whole time was spent right there in Egypt. I mean, you know, the biggest trip he took was through that desert heading toward Israel.
And he comes up and says that.
That's
How
right.
in the world?
Well, this is
But he
gonna be
did
a-
spend some powwow time.
Where did he come up with that?
He did spend some powwow time with the Almighty, and he come out glowing. So
Get all the philosophers together, but just get them down and start there, Al, and go from there, and it's quite the story.
So let me read this other statement. You turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. So he puts it back in time like you're only got a certain, you're very linear, as Jase described.
And it's quick.
Then he says this, but 1,000 years in your sight are like a day. So to God, 1,000 years, 24 hours. Then he says, or a watch in the night, which I looked it up, that's 6 hours. So he said to God, 1,000 years, 6 hours, 6 minutes, 6 milliseconds.
Yeah, I'd
What is
argue I think a lot of theological debates and arguments come down to the concept of time, and we're trying to understand and articulate a being who exists outside of that. And I think I've said this on the podcast before. We're so limited, right? Even in the discussion, because when we talk about space and time, which are both functions of the created universe, but this is not. We're trying to understand what that means, right? But we can't really access even the discussion about it because we are so limited and we are bound to space and time. So, if I were to ask the question, what was God doing before He created time? That's a question that doesn't even make sense because before is a word that's a temporal word, right? That's a word that has to do with time. So we don't even have the language capabilities. Or if I said, what is beyond space, the edge of space? Well, beyond is a spatial term. And so I think when we try to imagine a being, and I think we should try to comprehend this because what it does, it leads you to a frustration, a good frustration, to understand the bigness of who God is, that we don't even possess the language and the ability to talk about a being who exists outside of space and time. We don't even have the language for it. I mean, I think.
Go ahead, Deb.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and that was exactly my point. That's why I started where I started, because then you interject Jesus into this equation, who became one of us. He put himself in space and time as one of us to do some things that would ultimately lead to our salvation. Let's take a break. And then, Jase, I did the John 8, before Abraham was born, I am, which is, again, like Zach was saying, that didn't even make any sense from our perspective. What do you mean before Abraham? And then I also did Mark 12, which we're going to get to later.
Well, yeah, this is a great preview to the argument we left. I mean, we had this argument about the politics,
Right.
Give to Caesar
Right.
what is Caesar's and to God what is God. I mean, giving your allegiance to God. And then you have this argument about the afterlife, which in my prep for our discussion, which I knew you were preaching on this. I mean, I skimmed your lesson because
Right.
you just included it in the notes. But I was surprised at how many people, I looked at various polls and, take them for what they're worth. But most people from the data I looked at believe in the afterlife. There are very few people out there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was less than 10% in every poll imaginable, whether it was from a church or from the world, who do not have some view of what's going through the door, the death door, which was kind of shocking to me.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, it really makes sense, because if there's nothing, well, then why do any? It's just absurd. Life itself is absurd.
Right. That's right. But also think about this. Every human being that's born was created in the image of God. That's what he said in Genesis 1:26. So inside of every one of us is, in our DNA, God put in us, there's something that has a yearning for something more, revelation, whatever. Now, whether people ever act on it or do anything about it, it's there.
Remote, the remotest people we can find,
Right.
cultures, they all have this thinking,
That's right.
life beyond the grave.
That's right.
Well, it's one of the truths that's mentioned in Ecclesiastes 3:11 that says that God has set eternity in the hearts of men.
There you go.
He's put that in your heart. So
That's right.
you think, man, or C.S. Lewis said, if you find yourself longing for more than this world can provide, perhaps you were made for another world. And I think that's what Lewis was getting at is what's in Ecclesiastes. It's this idea, and we all have it. I mean, we have the longing for more.
Mm-hmm.
We have the longing for something that's transcendent. We have the longing for context. We have this longing for eternity, because even in our discussion of it, there's a reason why we're trying to figure out, like, what's this whole time and space thing about. The reason why we're trying to figure it out is because we don't like the idea that we are temporal, finite beings that are going to one day evaporate. Like,
That's
no,
right.
there's got to be more to it than that, right? And
Right.
I think that's what kind of drives a lot of the philosophical and scientific, pursuits. I mean, I just pulled this off my shelf, a book I read a few years ago by Stephen Hawking, Brief History of Time, and I was looking for a quote in there that he said, because this guy was very instrumental in what's called the development of the standard model of physics. And he says here in this book, I think this is interesting. He says, he's talking about time and the fact that time has a beginning. And he says, many people do not like the idea that time has a beginning, probably because it smacks of divine intervention. In other words, if time has a beginning, then there's got to be a God. And he said the Catholic Church, on the other hand, seized on the Big Bang model in 1951 and officially pronounced it as to be accurate with the Bible. Listen to this, though. Therefore, there were a number of attempts to avoid the conclusion by the scientific community that there had been a Big Bang. And the reason why is because that if it's true that time has a beginning, then Stephen Hawking, who was an atheist, was like, then there's a God. And so, in other words, we came up with these scientific models through Einstein's theory of relativity and all this stuff. And as we expand our knowledge in the scientific world, we realize that time had a beginning. And then we're like, oh, no, that can't be true, because if that's true, then there's got to be a God. So now the entire scientific community, and particularly in physics, is trying to get away from this. They're trying to get away from what's called the standard model because of that reason. And I think that it's like every time we think we make a discovery that is going to disprove the existence of God, we actually run right back into the necessity of his being. That's a pretty big power that you cannot escape him. You know what I mean? And I think that a lot of it lands with time. So,
well, what's amazing to me is you just mentioned several smart people and people that have come up with amazing things, and yet almost 4,000 years ago, there was a guy that basically laid out the whole situation. I mean, because he was getting it from the Creator, and so that's why that's why the Bible is so powerful. And the reason I went this route on my sermon, because I got to the point about the second coming, I said, well, what does all that the stuff you're talking about, time and space, have to do with the second coming? And I said, not much, just everything. Because if you don't understand how big God is and who he is.
Wasn't it 4,000 years ago? They just found it within not too long ago, some red door or something from the Mayans. It was supposedly over the tomb. And, they go in there and there's like a decapitated head that they had made incisions on where they could eat and drink during their death.
Yeah.
And the point was, you can look it up on the internet, because it was a big deal even in Hollywood. A lot of them wrote about it because it was, they're thinking of movie ideas. They had some underwater cave, where they're exploring and they find this door to hell. And whether they believe it or not is irrelevant, but they thought, boy, that'd be a good movie.
Yeah, that's right.
But I'm saying it's weird that you said that, because that's about the same time frame.
Right.
And it just shows you that we all have something inside of us.
Yep.
That's like, because if you just say, who was the writer who came up with all those really depressing short stories, that Kafka or whatever from Germany, and it's like, they made a bunch of movies about it. It was like, one of them was, I think, called The Trial. And he was like panicked the whole time. I think Anthony Perkins was in it. But the whole time it was like he was accused of doing a crime. And he was panicked about it. But he never knew what it was. And then, and the idea being, we've all done something wrong. But he had another one about where he wanted to go before the law and say his piece, and there was a door there, and he could see some radiance, and so he was like, that's the door to the other side, So he just became enamored with it, and he sat there, but the gatekeeper kept telling him to wait. No, you got to wait. Well, he wait. A month happened, 6 months, well, then a year, and he's wanting to get in there, so he started trying to bribe the gatekeeper. This is the story, and so it's like, after a while, the guy's sending for all his money. He's abandoning his family, his job. He's trying to get on the other side of this race. And at the end, he gets so old he can't do anything. And he's like, what do I got to do? And they're like, nothing. We're not letting you in. And it's like the most depressing thing ever. It's like, we're shutting the door. And the guy's like, well, where are all the other people? And they're like, this door was only for you. And you can't get in.
And that's it.
So all these people talk about what it means, what is the radiance about that, and it's like, it's the most depressing, terrible. If there's there's nothing. The guy wrote this 100 years ago, and people are still trying to.
Franz Kafka.
Yeah,
Franz. That's who wrote, but he was a.
But they make movies out of all his stuff, and they're all depressing because he's like he couldn't find the neck. When I read something like that, I'm like, oh, what? This guy needs Jesus.
Was he an atheist?
Yeah. I think what it is
I think he was a Jew who had a kind of a rough childhood or something. I remember hearing the story.
Let's take.
Are you talking about Kafka?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know his? Hang on, Zach. Let's take our last break. All right, go ahead.
I don't think he was a believer.
You know what his history is at?
I just looked him up. I think he was said born with general Austrian citizenship. German, Austrian. He may have been Jewish though.
No, he was
but I know
Jewish. I remember
it says
that.
here that he was. Says here that he was heavily influenced. Wrote a lot about what's called existential anxiety, which, if you've done any research on kind of existentialism, which I think is
Boy, that's our word for the day. Can you use it in a sentence first?
You know what?
Existential.
I'm not going to go down that route. Today,
I'd like to know what that means. I brought the guy up. They do it.
Well, we would know. We would probably know the term as postmodernism, existentialism, postmodernism. It's an idea that truth is relative, that there is no ultimate reality other than what we determine for ourselves. So we would know it as like, I have my truth and you do your truth. And I think what a lot of these existential philosophers and poets and writers, what they were writing about was the absurdity of it all, right? And so you end up with a term called nihilism, which is nothing matters. And that's kind of the end of it.
I think that's a good. I mean, I think what Al's lesson is tackling is, you have to bring this up, because these people, if they're living, I'm saying people as in all human beings, if you're just going to live like the door is not opening, even if you just devote your life to seeing it open, but ultimately, I mean, you don't have to interpret that any other way as that's really true without Jesus.
That's right. Well, I boiled it down.
It's
Go ahead.
It's funny because I've quoted this guy a lot. He's probably was the most influential writer for at least shaping the way I see the world, was Francis Schaeffer. And he wrote a lot about existentialism and a lot of, or what we would call postmodernism. He didn't call it that, but in his method of evangelism, what he said our goal is to expose the absurdity of this. And he used like an analogy that I thought was so good, because you got to be careful with this, because once you kind of learn the technique and of how to expose the absurdity of this, he said it's like, imagine somebody at the bottom of a mountain and they've got this tin shed over their head. It's like the rocks are coming down all on top of them, but they're bouncing off because they got this shed. He said your goal is because there's a big boulder coming that's going to crush them. He said you got to remove that thing and expose it for what it is, and it's going to be painful. But he also said you got to be careful, because if you lead someone to the end of their postmodernism or existentialism, then the end of that is not good. Without Jesus, without Jesus, then life is completely pointless.
But wouldn't you say, Zach, that this relative truth that you're mentioning that Schaeffer talked about, because he was, a few decades ago, isn't what you're currently seeing in our culture a result of what happens when you have your own set of truth and your own whatever? I mean,
precisely
factious. I mean, just look at culture.
It leads you, because what happens is you can't you can't bear the weight of carrying reality on your shoulders.
Right.
Nobody can, right? So if I'm determining reality for myself, I'm going to determine my own truth. Like, what does that even mean? Like, now I'm bearing that responsibility, and the weight of that is too much for a human being to carry. And so I think it's one of the primary discussions that we need to be having today is there a truth? And if so, where does it come from? And you can't really escape the fact that it comes from God. One of the things that I got chastised for when I ran for Congress was a podcast that I used to do another podcast years ago. And I had an episode that was on Sandy Hook, when the kids got killed at Sandy Hook. And one of the things I said in the episode was that inside of an atheistic worldview, there's nothing inside that worldview that would prevent something like Sandy Hook from happening. I'm not saying that atheism caused it, but my point, and that's what they said I said, which is not what I said, but my point was, if we determine truth for ourselves, then where in the world does morality come from? Yeah. Where does the value of human life come from? If it's purely subjective and we determine it for ourselves, then who gets to determine it? Right. Like, what if we disagree on the value of somebody's life? Then who's to say I'm wrong and who's to say I'm right if it's all determined from ourselves? And the answer is the person who gets to determine it, which is what Phil's movie was about, Torchbearer. It's the one that has the biggest stick. It's the one that has the most power. Might becomes right. Whoever's got the most power gets to, and this is the problem with history, right? When you look at tyrannical regimes that emerge, or any moral depravity where people are abused and all this. It all comes down to who gets to determine what's right and wrong. And one of the ideas that our country was founded on, and I'm not saying that the founding fathers got it all right, and I'm not even saying they were all believers, because I don't think they were, but this part they did get right. That if you're going to have an anchor for reality and an anchor for human rights, an anchor for liberty, or whatever the thing is you want to say, whatever that anchor is, it has to be non-arbitrary, which means it has to be something that does not move. It can't be determined by us, because if it's determined by us, then it becomes subjective and you have no real anchor. And that was the idea of Genesis 1:26, that all man's made in the image of God. And from that truth there, that's everything should flow from that in terms of how we see ourselves and our position in reality. Sorry, went off on a little tangent there.
No, it's good, because we're going to, after that resurrection argument, there's going to be an argument about the morality issue. So I think this is a good foundation for us.
It was a good setup for that.
By the way, you just add it all up. We who follow Jesus Christ, who did all of what we read about before the beginning of time. He's the marker of all time.
Yep.
And once that's over, in this age, when this ends, it's the end of time as we see it.
Right.
It's immortality forever.
It's the great.
You get on that line then.
We have the best. We have the best story.
Yeah, we stay on the
He's
line.
going to make, that's right.
So-
Well, give us your points.
So what I'm going to do is, because we're out of time.
I know, but you can give us your points, and it'll be a lead into the overtime.
Yeah, so I'm gonna give you my conclusion of where I wound up, because all that was to set up that he's coming back. That was the promise. Mm-hmm. And then when he does, some things are going to happen. We're going to understand eternity, because then we're going to get to experience it. So we leave time. Time is gone for us as well. But then there's also justice, and I had quite a bit to say about that. And then what I call the Great Reckoning. So we'll talk about that in the overtime. I'll give you my conclusion to my sermon.
Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by rating us on iTunes. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click that little bell to get notified about new episodes. And for even more content that you won't get anywhere else, subscribe to Blaze TV at blazetv.com/unashamed.